I'm feeling inspired today. I was actually going to shoot a different episode, a more down-to-earth, practical episode, which is going to get pushed off till next week because I was in the shower and I was just contemplating the nature of God and love and forgiveness, and just this profound chain of logic came to me that inspired me that I want to share with you. So we're going to talk about and explain why God forgives devilry and evil. This is a topic that perplexes many religious people and even non-religious people, honestly, because one of the biggest, I think, obstacles that even non-religious people have towards the notion of God is this idea of, like, if there is a God, how did God design such a terrible world? Why is there so much evil in the world? And I've talked about this previously, and I've talked about what is devilry in my episode. What is devilry? Go check that one out. It's kind of important to know when I use that term, what I really mean. So I'm going to be speaking here both figuratively and literally at the same time. It's a little tricky, but I want to take you through the logic here. So God forgives all devilry. What does that mean? What do I mean by devilry? Well, if you watched my episode about what is the devil, I use it sort of tongue-in-cheek. Don't take it too seriously. I'm not telling you that there is a Satan, with horns and a pitchfork somewhere in hell. I'm speaking more of like the human devilry that we see all around us. All of the shenanigans going around in politics and around the world, the wars, the violence, the theft, the exploitation, the abuse, the manipulation, the enslavement of others, and this sorts of stuff, right? All the stuff you don't like when it's happening to you, and all the stuff you love when you're doing it to others. When it serves you. See, when you're on the receiving end of it, you don't like it. But when you're on the benefiting end of it, and especially when you don't have to think about how you got the benefits, in other words, you do the devilry without yourself being conscious that you're doing devilry, then you love it. Because you love the fruits of the devilry, but you don't like perceiving yourself as the devil. So this is the sort of game that the ego mind plays, is that it tries to act like the devil while denying that it's doing so. And then, of course, when you point that out to it, it doubles down on its denial, and it denies that it's in denial that it's doing this. But anyways, so you might think that, like, well, God should punish this stuff. And this is very counterintuitive, is that what you discover is that God doesn't punish anything. Not even the worst atrocities that you could imagine. God doesn't punish these things. God is not even upset or disturbed by these things. It's just it doesn't affect God. Why is that? Well, the short answer is God is love. But there's more dots we got to connect here for this to make sense. But before we do that, let me just lay out a disclaimer here that what I'm talking about, I'm speaking from direct experience, from my own conscious experiences that I've had. Very high levels of consciousness, superhuman levels of consciousness. So I'm not here promoting any kind of religious dogma to you. I'm not trying to get you to believe this stuff. I am going to lay out the logic for you to help you to make sense of this in your own mind as you go about doing your spiritual practices and eventually, hopefully, becoming conscious of these things for yourself. Not because I said so, but because it's what is the case. And then I'm just giving you some analysis here and helping you to connect some dots in your mind, clear up certain confusions, right? So this is not dogma or ideology. Don't make it such. But anyways, the logic is this. See, God is everything. God is infinite consciousness. Truly infinite consciousness. What infinite means, it has no bounds. That means it has no limits upon it. That means it extends in all directions, in all dimensions, not just spatially, but in every possible way that you could imagine. So if God is everything, absolutely everything, then God is those things that you would call devilry. Whatever you think devilry is, however you define it. You want to define slavery or genocide or sexual abuse or the abuse of children or whatever you want to define as, the epitome, the pinnacle of devilry. And then minor forms of devilry like lying and cheating and stealing and tax evasion, whatever. Maybe you think war is the ultimate form of devilry, genocide, something like that. So God is all those things, if God is everything. See, that's the logic of it. The logic of it is oneness. That's the fundamental principle behind the entire universe. It's oneness. Everything is connected to everything else, and the only way anything can exist is if everything exists. So see, as a finite human consciousness here in this little dream that you've been living in, it seems to you that, well, life is this certain way, and it has to be this way, and it can't be some other way because of all the limits that are placed upon you, physically, materially, and so forth. There are limits upon what your body can do, what your mind can think, and what you can even imagine. But this is all finite consciousness. God is infinite consciousness. Infinite consciousness means it's completely unlimited as to what it can imagine. It can literally imagine anything. So literally, God can imagine a physical, material devil if he wanted to. I say he, really, it's an it, or it's you. But God can imagine, because it's infinite consciousness, it can imagine anything. So it can imagine war, genocide, abuse, exploitation, slavery. It can imagine physical demons and devils, an infinite number of different kinds. Just like in your dreams, when you're sleeping at night, fruit fly flying around. When you're sleeping at night, there's no limit to the kind of horrors that you can imagine. I mean, you've had nightmares. Think back to the kind of nightmares you've had. Think of the diversity of all the crazy nightmares that you've concocted with your mind. Well, see, God is that taken to infinity. So if God wants to, God, infinite consciousness, can construct its own physical material hell if it wants to. Because it's infinite creative potential. Infinite creative potential means that it can imagine atoms, molecules, cells, creatures, aliens, angels, devils. It can dream all sorts of nightmares. It can dream bliss realms of beautiful sex and food and whatever other material pleasures you desire, money, vacations, anything. The universe can literally imagine anything because it is pure infinite imagination. It's everything. And the only reason anything can exist is because everything exists within infinite consciousness. It's like an infinite possibility space. So now think about this. Imagine you are this infinite possibility space. And of course, now here's a further little wrinkle to the logic. If we're talking about oneness and everything, see, if God is everything, that means, what about you? And if God is infinite consciousness, what about your consciousness? You're conscious right now. You're a thing right now. So a thing is part of everything. That means you're God. There can't be a God separate from a you, because God is the creator of everything, and the way it creates things is not by sitting outside of it and then creating it and being separate from it, but by actually incarnating as it. So it's incarnated as you right now, listening to me, imagining this whole conversation. So this is what God is imagining right now. So you are it, but it is also everything else. And there's no limit as to how it can be. It can be any way it wants. Right now, it just happens to choose to be the way that it is right now. If it wasn't doing that, then you couldn't exist as a human. You would be something else. You'd be a kangaroo or a devil or an angel or whatever else it was thinking of. Or if it was thinking of nothing, you'd be nothing. Or if it was thinking of everything, you'd be everything. You see, this would present you with an existential crisis. You would think that you're losing your mind. You think you're going crazy. You would probably go to a psych ward, and then there the shrinks would evaluate you. And if you were honest with them about what you were experiencing and what you were conscious of, that you were everything, they would put you on antipsychotic medication. That's what they would do. Because they don't understand how radical and serious this is. You know, we're not just talking about human psychology here. We're talking about the origin of all of existence, all of creation. So the reason God can create anything is because it is everything. So the way it creates is just by imagining whatever it wants. Right now, that doesn't mean that your little human ego can imagine whatever it wants. That's not what I'm saying. Your little human ego is something it's imagining. That's a limit it's placing upon itself. Right? So you see, infinite consciousness constrains itself into something finite, which resembles your human experience. And it does feel very finite. It is literally finite because it's imagining itself to be finite, but it doesn't have to always be that way. It could unimagine it the next moment. Now, will it? Well, the problem again is that if it did, you would lose your mind. So it doesn't, for your own sake. But also it can, and then people do lose their minds. People lose their minds just throughout the course of life, through extreme stress. People have psychotic episodes, schizophrenic episodes, whatever. Or people take psychedelics and lose their mind. People do spiritual practice and lose their mind through meditation or yoga or self-inquiry. So there's a lot of ways to lose your mind. And it can also go wrong. It's not always good to lose your mind. You can lose your mind in a controlled, healthy manner, and you can lose your mind in an uncontrolled, unhealthy, dysfunctional, suicidal manner. So you got to be careful about how you go about losing your mind. I don't recommend the dysfunctional path because that can cause a lot of damage to yourself and to others. And we've talked about that in the past. But anyways, so the logic of it here is that the only way you can have anything is if you have everything. So when you have everything, that means you are everything. Consciousness is everything. God is everything. If God is everything, literally, then how can God be upset at anything? How can God judge or condemn anything? Because if God was judging or condemning anything, it would be judging and condemning its own nature. In other words, another way to put it is truth, since God is truth, since there is nothing outside of God because it's infinity and it's everything that there could ever possibly be, that is the truth. This absolute truth, if it didn't forgive itself and accept all parts of itself, that means it would be in conflict with itself. That means it would be denying aspects of itself. That means truth would not be fully accepting itself as truth. Truth would be at war with itself. And sure enough, this does happen within the human realm of limited consciousness, but it can't actually happen at the highest levels of consciousness, at infinite consciousness. It can't happen. At infinite consciousness, consciousness is too conscious to deny or resist any parts of itself. And when this happens, the idea that God would condemn, judge, hate, demonize, or not forgive any aspect of itself is ludicrous. It's tantamount to insanity. You'd have to literally be insane to judge your own self, because the infinite self, the self that is everything, is the only thing that exists. It's the only thing that can be, just by virtue of the fact that it's everything, and you can't have more than everything. Everything is everything. It also includes nothing. So, when you've got absolute everything, and you're fully conscious of it as that, then how can you judge it? How can you not love it? And here is where love and truth become synonymous and actually identical. Because when you're fully conscious of what you are and what the truth is, everything, simultaneously what comes with that is a full acceptance and surrender to what is, and that is simply love. Unlimited love for your own self as creation, as the act and process of creation, as the creator and the created. And also another element of logic we should bring in here to this equation is selflessness. So God is selfless. The reason God is selfless with a capital S is because a self with a lowercase s, like a human self, yourself, as this biographical, biological self you think you are, that self, see, that's a finite form within consciousness. That's a finite thing consciousness is imagining. So if God had a self, it couldn't be everything, because by definition, a lowercase s self is a finite thing. So see, if you think that you're John or Sarah, that's your little finite self, and then you think I'm Leo, you think this is another separate finite self, and that we're separate selves. And see, for you to be John or Sarah, you can't be Leo. You have to exclude Leo from that. And for me to think of myself as Leo, I have to exclude John and Sarah from my little self. You see, so if you're getting stuck to one finite self, that means you can't recognize yourself as the infinite self, because the finite gets in the way of the infinite. You see, this is a very existential sort of trade-off that we have here between this. We have this tug of war between the finite and the infinite. But God in its highest form is completely selfless because it needs to have the infinite freedom to incarnate as any self, to be able to imagine itself as being any self, not just a human self, but a kangaroo self, a koala self, an alien self, an angel self, a devil self, whatever it wants. It needs the freedom to be able to imagine itself as absolutely everything. And so, since God is selfless, that means it can take on the form of an infinite number of different selves. It's all possible selves, in other words. It's the superposition of all possible selves. It's the source of all selves. It's the empty self that is dreaming itself as a specific finite self. So now, think about why you would not forgive something. Think about something that might happen in reality that you would not forgive. You might take a stance and say, I will never forgive some person for doing some X amount of evil if they reach that level of evil. Like, I will never forgive Hitler. I will never forgive Stalin. I will never forgive that person who molested me when I was young. I will never forgive my ex-boyfriend for cheating on me. I will never forgive my wife for leaving me. I will never forgive my father for abandoning me. I will never forgive my mother for hitting me. Well, fill in the blank what that is for you. And so what I want you to notice is that the reason you're struggling to forgive that is because as a finite self, you have a survival agenda and survival biases which are informing your entire mind and perceptual system. So literally the way you look at the world is informed by what you need to survive in the world. And so those things that you can't forgive, notice, the only reason you can't forgive them is because of how threatening they are to your survival as a finite self. Survival as a finite self. So actually the reason that you're not able to forgive is because you're selfish. But you see, God doesn't have this problem, because God in its most infinite form, when it has no attachments to being a specific human self, what does it care? Think about it. If you had no attachment to survival, if you didn't need to make money, if you didn't care about how your children felt, if you didn't care about your job, if you didn't care about achieving anything specific in life, if you didn't even care about whether you lived or died, if you didn't care about whether you're experiencing pleasure or pain, or if you're suffering or not, imagine if you were so selfless and so unbiased in your consciousness that you literally did not distinguish between these things and you didn't care which one of them was happening to you. In that case, would there be anything you wouldn't forgive? No, you see. So when you're infinitely selfless, you automatically forgive everything because you're simply accepting of everything. You're not attached to having experience go one way. You're not attached to your dream being dreamt in a particular direction. That attachment, which your little finite self has, so you want your dream to unfold in a particular way. Like you believe that in the future you want to get married and have children, and you want your children to do well, and you want them to have good health, you want them to go to good schools, you want them to eat good food. You also have aspirations for yourself. You want a certain career, you want a certain life purpose, you want a certain amount of wealth in your life and certain material luxuries and comforts, and you want to play video games, and you want to be entertained, and you want to laugh and smile and have fun, and you don't want pain, and you don't want cancer, and you don't want heart disease, and you don't want to be obese, and there's all these things you don't want, and then there's all these things you do want. This is what sets up the whole problem. Because when you're attached to having things go a certain way and not having them go a different way, these biases and attachments now commit you to hating certain aspects of reality. That hatred is the mechanism you use to avoid those things and to guide your dream, to shape your dream, to have it unfold in a particular direction that would be self-serving. And notice all the stuff you want is completely self-serving. Why do you want it? Because it's serving your agenda and it's making you feel good. That's ultimately why you want anything. Even if you want to murder people, the reason you want to murder people is because it's going to make you feel good. In some twisted sense, that is what's going on inside the mind of a murderer. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. They take a certain twisted delight. The suffering they inflict on others actually makes them happy. And that can happen when you're in a very low state of consciousness. You know, a being in a low state of consciousness takes pleasure in the suffering of others, will actually take pleasure in torturing an animal, or will take pleasure in his or her political opponent being defeated. And you've experienced that. Maybe you don't experience pleasure from torturing animals and you think that's sick and twisted and you would never go down that dark road, but you still take pleasure. You take pleasure when your enemies do badly. You take pleasure when your political opponents lose in an election. You take pleasure when there's a debate going on between two sides and your side's scoring points against the other side, and the other side seems to be crumbling and getting debunked or embarrassed. You watch those YouTube videos where either liberals or conservatives are getting dunked upon and shown to be idiots, and you take pleasure in that, depending on which side you're on, what attachments and biases you have. See? If you're a soldier at war, you take pleasure in the enemies that you're fighting being killed. You actually smile when you shoot an enemy in the face. And your commanders smile and congratulate you for doing that. See? Now, of course, you have a whole story about how it's important that you do this for the safety of the nation, the motherland, and for defending children. I mean, in your mind, you justify it in such a way that the smile seems totally valid and legitimate. But nevertheless, you take delight in these things. That's because you have a certain agenda. As a self, as a finite self. But see, as the infinite self, God has no agenda other than the creation of everything. Furthermore, the reason God forgives everything, doesn't punish anything, is because God is the very thing that you hate or judge or criticize. God is conscious of that, but you as a finite self are not conscious of that. You see, so when you're a soldier and you're shooting somebody in the face and then you smile and you're happy, the only reason you can smile and be happy about that is because you've separated yourself from the one you shot. And you're not conscious of the one that you shot as being you. But this goes way deeper than that. Because, like, see, if you hear a news story about some person who was torturing animals, you're going to hear that and your natural instinct is going to be say, oh my God, that sick bastard. How could he? We should lock him up. He's evil. That's from the human point of view. But from God's point of view, from the point of view of everything, see, God can't judge that because God is literally doing that. God is conscious that God is doing that. God is a torturer of animals. God is a murderer. God is a rapist. God is Hitler. God is Stalin. God is terrorism. God is every terrorist who ever lived. And God is every law enforcement officer who has combated terrorism. God is both the slave and the slave owner at the same time. See, as a human self, you're not conscious of that because you just believe that you're either a slave or a slave owner. You're not both at the same time. Or you believe that you're either pro-animal rights or you're anti-animal rights or whatever. You're not both at the same time. Or you believe that you're you're pro-terrorism or anti-terrorism. You're not both at the same time. But when you're conscious that you're everything, what does that mean? That means you're everything. Everything. No exclusions, no exceptions. Everything. And so this is the difficulty for humans and for finite selves, is that when a human self hears that, oh, you're everything, that sounds kind of nice and hippy-dippy, sounds kind of new agey and cool, until you actually start to go through the ramifications of what that means. And then you realize that this is extremely radical and very threatening, because all of a sudden you're a chair, you're a table, you're that corporation that you hate. Think of a corporation that you hate, just absolutely hate. You are that. You're every person that you hate. Not only are you the people that might be bad, like criminals and terrorists and stuff, but you're even at a more deeper, profound level, you're the abstractions of evil itself. So think of not a specific terrorist, think of just terrorism in the abstract, the idea of terrorizing people and getting joy out of it. Think of that as a pure abstraction. You are that. God is that. But see, as a human finite self, you've disowned that aspect of your consciousness and of the universe. And you did it for good reason. Totally understandable why you did it. Because if you didn't do it, then how would we structure society? You see, so for the structuring of society, for survival to occur, you have to do this. And see, God is conscious of this, whereas you're not conscious of this. God is conscious that survival is completely necessary at the level of finite consciousness. So see, God is so infinitely conscious that it can't even judge you for doing the survival activities that you got to do to survive in the situation that you're in. Which is why God forgives everybody. Because all everybody is doing, all the evil and devilry in the world is just nothing other than people trying to survive, struggling to survive in different ways. And the more twisted circumstances, the more limited of a circumstance a person finds themselves in, the harder they have to fight to survive, otherwise they're going to die. And so when people find themselves in very twisted, virtually impossible survival situations, they turn into monsters. This is how a monster is created. For example, a little child, innocent little child is born and then gets abused every day and molested by his parents, who are drug addicts, let's say, and alcoholics. And this child is just constantly criticized and judged and physically abused and verbally abused and emotionally manipulated for years. And then is there any surprise that this child will become a murderer or a mass shooter or a terrorist or something in the future when he's an adult? No. That's just his coping mechanism for the years of abuse that he's received. See? So you, as a finite human just trying to survive in the world and be happy, you don't care about that. You don't care about the truth. You just care about being happy. But God has no attachments. And it's infinitely conscious. So it's completely conscious of why this mass shooter or murderer turned out the way he did. Because of, the abuse that was received and the virtually impossible survival situation that this little kid was placed into, which ended up warping his psyche and his mind. You see, and God isn't just conscious that happened. God is that. God created that. You see, so the reason God can't judge you and God has to forgive you is because God is you and God created you, no matter how evil you are. It doesn't matter what you do in life, no matter how many people you kill or abuse or exploit or manipulate or cheat or steal or whatever, it doesn't matter, because while you will lose consciousness of the fact that you're God creating that, God will never lose consciousness of that. God will always be conscious that not only is that a part of God, but that God consciously created this, because God is infinite consciousness. God is infinite creative potential. So that possibility is just one possibility out of an infinite number of possibilities of everything that God is. And God is completely conscious of that and completely accepts that. Not only does it accept that, it loves it, because it doesn't distinguish between any aspect or part of itself, because it has no self and it has no biases. If you had no self, if you had no survival agenda, you would have absolutely no biases to such a radical degree that the lack of bias would not just be at the psychological level, like, oh, well, You might say, God likes all flavors of ice cream equally. God doesn't distinguish between chocolate and vanilla and strawberry and coconut and whatever, mint, chocolate, mint chip, whatever your favorite ice cream is. See, you as a human have a favorite. And there are certain ones that you might think are gross, that you would never want to eat again after you try it once. But see, God doesn't care. God literally likes every ice cream flavor equally. But it's even more radical than that because, see, in your mind, you actually think there is a difference between chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, strawberry ice cream, coconut ice cream. You actually think that there's a physical, material difference between these ice cream flavors. God is so infinitely conscious that God not only lacks psychological biases, and even deeper than that, there's sort of the biological level where, like, you might think that, well, all the ice cream flavors, okay, maybe you could imagine a human opens their mind so radically that he or she can appreciate all the ice cream flavors. But then if I give you a bowl of shit with all the ice cream flavors, and then I ask you, well, okay, so you can handle all the different ice cream flavors, but if I just give you a bowl of pure shit, it's not ice cream, are you still going to be able to enjoy it as much as all the different ice creams you like? See, I would be pushing the limits of how open your consciousness is. And you would probably say, no, Leo, that's not ice cream, that's shit. I'm not going to eat shit. And even if I am, I'm not going to enjoy it as much as ice cream. That's silly. There's a physical difference between the two. But what I'm telling you is that God is so conscious that it wouldn't even distinguish between the ice cream and the shit. But then we take it to the next level, is that we say, this goes so deep, you become so conscious that literally the physical difference between the different flavors of ice cream starts to dissolve, such that the difference between chocolate and vanilla actually, see, a materialist scientist would tell you, well, there's a physical difference between the two. They have different atoms, different molecules. They hit the taste bud receptors differently, and your nervous system interprets them differently. And maybe one of them is good for you, one of them is bad for you. Maybe you're allergic to chocolate and then it's bad for you. See, this is what a scientist would tell you. But the scientist is not conscious enough. If you become more conscious than that, you become superhumanly conscious, which you'll start to realize that literally the physical difference between the actual atoms of the chocolate and the vanilla ice cream will itself start to dissolve, such that you literally will not be able to tell the two apart. And then it'll go so radically deep that even when I give you a bowl of shit, and you compare that bowl of shit to vanilla ice cream, you will cease being able to make the distinction between shit and ice cream, because the difference between shit and ice cream, you think it's a physical difference, but that physical difference is itself something you're imagining. So there is no such difference at a high enough level of consciousness. And then if you take this to its ultimate extreme, is of course that if I give you a bowl of the most delicious vanilla ice cream you've ever had on the one hand, and then I give you torture of children on the other hand, an actual child being physically tortured, and I ask you, is there a difference between these two things? You are going to say, of course there is. And God, from its highest perspective, is going to say, of course there isn't. They're all just part of infinite consciousness, such that there's literally no difference. So now imagine if you had that level of consciousness. At that level of consciousness, you're not human anymore. Because human is a distinction you're making within consciousness. You're saying, I'm human and that's a table over there. See, that distinction has to dissolve at that level of consciousness. And so from that level of consciousness, what is there to judge? What is there to criticize? What is there to condemn or to demonize? Is there anything wrong at that level of consciousness? You can't. There can't be anything wrong because you've literally transcended the distinction between right and wrong, good and bad, pain and pleasure. Imagine, for example, being so conscious that there is no difference in your consciousness between an orgasm and being hit in the face with a baseball bat. See, you as a human, it's difficult for you to imagine the blurring of that distinction. For you, the distinction is so stark, so physical, so inescapable that it would seem like, Leo, you'd have to lose your mind to think that there's no difference between these two things. And you're right, you would have to lose your mind. You'd have to lose that mind, that ego mind that is attached to the sensations of an orgasm versus the sensations of being hit in the face with a baseball bat. After all, ask yourself, what's the difference? Why is it that you enjoy orgasms, but you don't enjoy being hit in the face? If you think very objectively about it, what you'll realize is that there's actually no good reason. The reasons are all purely selfish. The reason I like orgasms is because it makes me feel good, and that's selfish. And that's part of my survival function. And getting hit in the face is the opposite of that. That's why I don't like it. But when you become conscious enough, this ceases to matter because you also transcend the distinction between life and death. At that level of consciousness, there is no difference between life and death. They merge into a single unity of pure infinite consciousness. So when this happens, you're so conscious that you realize that consciousness is nothing but pure love. That's what love is. You see, there's an extremely profound metaphysics behind love. Love is not merely a human emotion. The human emotions of love, that is love, but that's like the tip of a spear. You've only felt the tip. And what I'm talking about is the entire spear. When you see the entire spear of love, what you realize that here's a technical metaphysical definition of love for you. This is so profound, it might take you 20 years to understand what I'm about to say. Ready? Love is the realization that there is no difference between anything. Love is a complete absence of all bias. That's really what love is at the ontological level. The deepest love you're ever going to feel, the deepest love that it's possible to feel, is when you become so conscious that you become conscious that the difference between absolutely everything is imaginary. And when you realize that, what you're left with is infinite love. Because if there's no difference between anything, that means everything is equally great. Now you say, oh, Leo, but doesn't that also mean that everything is equally bad? No, it doesn't. Because bad is a judgment your ego self is making. That's a bias you have. When you remove all biases, the end result of that is not neutrality. It's actually infinite love. It's infinite truth. It's infinite self-acceptance. The only reason you're rejecting parts of reality is because you're scared of the suffering, of experiencing suffering. But when you bite that bullet and you're willing to experience anything, when you stop having any biases whatsoever, what you're left with is infinite love. What this means is practically you're willing to experience everything. And the reason you're willing to experience everything is because you realize you are everything. And you stop cherry picking experiences or dreams. See, when you're infinitely conscious, you're so conscious, you're literally untouchable. You're immortal at that level of consciousness. At that level of consciousness, you no longer care about excluding any experiences from your consciousness because you realize the entire purpose of existence is to embrace yourself. When you're that conscious, you're too conscious to be able to resist your own self. And then what you realize is that the game of reality, not just the game of life, but even going beyond life, but the game of reality itself, the game of existence is a deeper and deeper, ever deeper, infinite embrace of oneself as all of existence. And so what happens is that you give up more and more of yourself to embrace more and more of yourself. You give up more of your finite self and more of your biases to be able to embrace more of your infinite self and to realize more of your infinite self. But as you give that up, you're literally giving up your humanity, you're giving up life, you're giving up pleasure, you're giving up all of your goals, all of your dreams. You're giving up all of that for what? For everything. See, you're giving up something for everything. You're giving up the finite for the infinite. With the ultimate realization that if you continue down this road, what's going to happen is that you're going to completely lose all of your attachments and even your physical form. You're going to become so infinitely conscious that you will embrace literally every possible dream that can be dreamt. You will become murder and torture and rape and genocide, and of course, all the good stuff too. And you're going to become this at ever deeper and deeper and deeper and more profound levels. And as you're doing this, all that's happening is you're just surrendering to the truth of what you are. It's not that you're trying to create evil in the world. It's just you realize that evil is just a part of everything. And the way you're going to overcome the evil is not by going around it, but by going through it so completely that you will embody it to such a deep degree that you won't be able to hate it anymore. You see, that which you hate, you are resisting embodying. And so you're going through your life judging people, and then see every judgment you make of others, every condemnation, criticism you make, now you yourself are forced into this sort of dualistic game where it's like, well, if that person abuses animals, that means I can't abuse animals too, because if I do, that makes me a hypocrite. That also makes me evil. And, that person does a mass shooting, that means if I shoot people, that makes me evil. And so I can't do that. And so now you're living with all these limitations. And you say, well, but Leo, but if we just let everybody do anything they want, is that going to create chaos? Yes. It might destroy civilization. See, this is why civilization, like I said in the past, civilization is a house of cards built on lies. It has to be, because it's not true. For civilization to be the way that it is, it has to not be other ways. See, civilization is a very limited, finite sort of pyramid scheme. And in so doing, it marginalized a lot of people throughout history. It abuses a lot of people. So the paradox of constructing a civilization is that as you're constructing a finite civilization, all of the trade-offs and limitations of being finite become very starkly apparent. This is why every civilization throughout all of human history has always been evil. So ironically, as you're trying to build your beautiful civilization, you're committing a lot of evil in the process. So ironically, see, evil is the most counterintuitive thing. You think that by resisting, by demonizing, by hating and judging and criticizing evil, that you're going to create a world with no evil. It's not going to happen. And actually, the more you push evil away, the more it boomerangs back on you. So, see, you're not conscious enough to realize that, whereas God is. Therefore, God realized that the only solution to the problem of evil is not to fight evil. See, if God was doing that, God would be stupid. The solution to evil is to realize that it's you. It's nothing other than you. It's something you're imagining. It's something you're doing. It's not separate from you. So rather than trying to disown it, the counterintuitive move is to own it. Own evil. Own it so deeply that you stop having a problem with it. Own it so deeply that it kills you. I mean, in the egoic sense. So deeply that it kills you in the egoic sense, and then you cease resisting. What do you cease resisting? You cease resisting pain, suffering, and death. You cease resisting these things. And then, in this way, you've transcended death without physically harming your body. Although really, to transcend death, see, you can't truly transcend death if you're still worried about maintaining the safety of your body. Now, I still want you to care about the safety of your body and treat your body well and so forth, but to truly transcend death, do you understand what that means? It can't just be like at an intellectual level where it's like, oh yeah, I've transcended death, but then I still care about my body. Like, no, to truly transcend death means that if you die tomorrow, you're okay with it. And if you're not okay with it, then you haven't transcended death. It's a very radical thing to transcend death. Very few people have done it. It can be done, but the cost of doing it is so outrageously high that almost nobody will do it. And I'm not claiming that I have done it, at least not permanently. I've been in states where it's obvious to me that it's possible. And in that state, death is transcended, but then if your state becomes finite again, you're going to be afraid to die. So, I mean, really the only way to transcend death is to be in a permanent infinite state of consciousness, which is not easy to do. So you see, the short of it is that since God is everything, since God imagines everything, since God creates everything, since God incarnates as everything, since God is truth, since God is love, since God is one, it has no option but to forgive you. Because really, when God forgives you, God is just all God is doing in that moment, it's not really even forgiving you. All God is doing is God is just conscious that it's you. God is conscious that it is the sin that you feel you committed. Another way to put it is sort of in a poetic way, God created the devil. God is conscious that God created the devil. Why? Why would God create the devil? Because God is everything. Literally, the images of the devil in your mind are being constructed and held by God's consciousness right now, as I'm speaking. The idea of a devil, the pictures you've seen of the red sort of cartoon caricature of a red devil with pointy tail and ears and horns and a pitchfork, that image, where do you think that image came from? That came from infinite consciousness. So I said earlier that I'm going to be speaking here metaphorically and literally at the same time. Well, this is what I meant, is that God literally imagines the physical devil as you've seen it rendered in books, in movies, in cartoons, wherever you've seen it in your own mind's imagination, in your nightmares, if you had nightmares where you met the devil. So literally God imagined all those. but then also figuratively speaking, all the devilish stuff that humans have ever done throughout human history, God has also imagined and done all those things. God is all those things. And God loves all those things. Because God is too conscious to separate itself from those things. See, to hate those things, to criticize those things, to judge those things, to condemn those things, you have to fool yourself into thinking you are not those things. You have to erect a barrier between those things and you. And that's only possible if your consciousness has a neck restraint around it. When you remove all the restraints from consciousness, it's too conscious of its own self to be able to judge or criticize itself in any way because it realizes its own perfection. See, you as a finite human self, you believe perfection is some sort of finite dream that personally suits you. So your version of perfection is something along the lines of having the most beautiful sexual partners, pleasing you sexually in your favorite ways, eating the best food that you personally love, looking physically however you personally want to look, living in the kind of house that you personally is your dream house to live in, living in a part of the world that's the dream part of the world to live in. See, that's your version of perfection. But this is the devil's version of perfection. What you're imagining there is a very finite form of perfection, which isn't absolute perfection because it's excluding so much. See, like if you say that your version of perfection is like living on a beach in Hawaii in a $10 million mansion on the beachfront with a beautiful view of the sunset and coconut trees above you and the perfect weather and no work and just supermodels sexually gratifying you day and night, new ones every day, every night, and the best food, sushi all the time or whatever you like to eat, caviar, filet mignon, like just to your little human mind, that seems like that's such a good thing. But that's just because your consciousness is so limited, your imagination is so small, and you're so extremely biased in your appreciation of reality. See, if you were truly conscious, what you would realize is just how cripplingly shallow that version of perfection is. Because see, if you're eating sushi or filet mignon, think of all the other foods you're not eating. If you're in Hawaii, think of all the other beautiful places in the world you're not at. You're pretending as though Hawaii is the most beautiful place in the world. It's not. No one place in the world is the best. No one food is the best. No one sexual partner is the best. Not even 100 different sexual partners is the best. Not even the experience of having 100 back-to-back orgasms is the best. Not even loving your 5 children is the best. You think these things are the best. They're not the best. The best from the most objective point of view of infinite consciousness is infinity. The best is everything. No one part of infinity can be the best. Because one finite part of infinity is going to exclude another finite part of infinity. And when you're doing that, you're missing the absolute whole. You're never in wholeness when you're clinging to one thing, no matter how good it is. When your consciousness is low, you're okay with that You're happy with that, and that is your version of heaven and bliss. But when your consciousness is infinitely high, you can't be okay with that because it's too limiting for you. Imagine being so conscious that you don't want to just live in a house in Hawaii. You want to live in a house everywhere on the planet. And you don't just want to live in the luxury houses, you want to live in every house, literally every fucking house on the planet. This includes the slums of India, the slums of Brazil, the slums in the Middle East, the ghettos all around the world. Imagine you're so conscious that you want that. But you also want the mansions too. You're going to get it all. So you're not losing anything. That's the thing. See, you as a finite human self, you think you're losing something by living in the slum. Because the slum excludes the possibility of living in a mansion. And living in a mansion excludes the possibility of living in a slum. But to God, there's no exclusion. It's all being included in an infinite dream. So it's going to include living in every house on the entire planet. It's going to be, but it's also going to include being every physical type of human. See, for you, there's like some sort of perfect ideal image that you have of how you might want to be. Like if we allowed you to do free plastic surgery with no pain and no repercussions, you would redesign your face and your body to look totally different. And you would think, okay, now I've reached my perfect form through genetic engineering and whatever, plastic surgery. And you think you'd be happy, that would be perfection for you, is to reach that perfect form with the perfect hair, the perfect eye color, the perfect facial symmetry, all of that, and you think that would be perfection. But that's not perfection. True, absolute perfection, if you were infinitely conscious, would be that you would incarnate and take the form of every human that has ever lived, both the beautiful ones and the ugliest ones, the deformed ones, the crippled ones, all of them. And you see, and we just take this, we just keep doing this and doing this and doing this. We keep including more and more and more into consciousness until there's nothing left. Until we reach infinity. This means that, see, you think that, well, like, of all the different creatures you could be born into in this on this one planet that we're on, you know, let's say you had a conscious choice as to what you're going to incarnate into before you were born. You could be a human, you could be a giraffe, a kangaroo, an ostrich, a lion, an eagle, a killer whale, a mouse, an ant, a stink bug, a vampire bat, you know, like, of all the different stuff you could incarnate as, which one would be the best for you? You'd probably say something like human, but you see how biased that is? Or maybe you say, Leo, I want to be a bald eagle flying high in the sky. And you think that that's your version of perfection. Or you want to be a killer whale, you know, apex predator or something. But see, your imagination is still far too limited. Why limit yourself to any one of those when you can be them all? You see, this is how God thinks. This is how a very, very conscious entity thinks. The difficulty is that this level of consciousness is so far above how most humans operate that it seems fantastical, it seems crazy, it seems just like fairy tales. Like, I imagine some of you are going to listen to this and you're going to think, this is just totally nuts. But you see, that's just from your little perspective. From God's perspective, what you're doing and your attachment to your little small world, that is what's truly nuts. Look at how narrow and limited your experience of life is. Look at how much you suffer and fear and hate and judge others and yourself. You don't even like your own self. You can't even like your own physical appearance. You're going to spend the next 50 years of your life hating yourself, hating your physical appearance, hating where you live, hating where you work, hating what's happening to you, hating the people who you're in relationship with, frustrated, petty and bitter and miserable. This is the reality of human life. This is what you cling to so dearly. This is what you call sanity. And then when I talk about infinite love and infinite acceptance and all this, you think that's crazy talk. You see, it's all just a matter of perspective. If your consciousness is very narrow, then what you want out of life is very narrow. If your consciousness is infinitely expansive, then what you want out of life is absolutely everything. And see, God is so conscious that God is even conscious that you can't help yourself in your little narrow perspective. So God fully understands that when you're locked into your little narrow perspective and all that you want is just a little bit of sex and you want a little bit of sushi and you want a little bit of filet mignon and you want a little bit of Hawaii and you want a little bit of a $10 million mansion and you want a little bit of more money in your bank account, God fully understands why you want those things and why you can't tolerate anything more than that. And God forgives you for that selfishness. Because you see, God is so selfless that it is not bothered by selfishness. God is so loving, God is not bothered by hate. God is so non-judgmental, God is not bothered by your judgments. God is so good, God is not bothered by bad. That's the power of being completely selfless. If you're completely selfless, you're completely unbiased, nothing can bother you. But God is also conscious that you in your finite form aren't that conscious. Therefore, it's conscious that stuff does bother you as a human. So it's not like God is sitting above you and saying, ah, ha, 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 look at those stupid humans. Look how petty they are. They're just a bunch of idiots. No, see, God is too conscious for that. God is so conscious that God realizes that it is the very ignorance and unconsciousness and selfishness that you are right now. So God is so conscious that it's conscious of its own unconsciousness. And it accepts that too. See, right now, God is conscious as I sit here that it is speaking through me, and that even though this finite incarnation called Leo has become conscious of God's full consciousness, God is also conscious that in this present moment, this Leo incarnation is not infinitely conscious. And that's something the Leo incarnation has to accept and learn to love as part of its incarnation. And so there's a very deep compassion there. There's a deep compassion for the fact that finite conscious entities are stuck within the finite domain. It's sort of like God sees all these people dreaming nightmares, and God can't stop it from happening because that's what God is. God is everything. You might say, well, Leo, why doesn't God just snap his fingers and stop it? Because God is everything. If God snapped his fingers and stopped all the nightmares, God would be denying all the nightmares. God can't do that because it's too conscious and it's too loving, such that it loves the nightmares too. See, when you're asking God to snap its fingers and to remove something from existence, that is not God's problem. That's your problem. That's a problem of your perception. That's your biases creeping in and asking for reality to be changed to suit you. But to change reality to suit a finite consciousness would be the very definition of devilry. See, in asking God to do that, you're actually asking God to be a devil. If reality was suited to the human psyche, reality would be evil. So reality can't be suited to the psyche of any human or any one conscious entity. God's job is to ensure that reality is not monopolized by any one entity. It has to be for the good of all, not for the good of some. And it's precisely because of this that God won't snap his fingers and remove the nightmares. It's actually you who must accept the nightmares and surrender to them. And if you fully do, they will cease being nightmares. The nightmares are there to test your love. Think of it as like love is like the ultimate test of your consciousness. It's the ultimate honest signal. How much of reality can you love? How much of consciousness can you love? Can you love all of it? As a human, no, you can't, because you'd be dead. But you can increase your capacity to love more and more of it, or at least to understand it conceptually. And so the tests can get harder and harder and harder. The bar can rise infinitely high. It can rise so high it'll kill you as a human. But most humans, for them, the bar is very, very low as far as what they can love. And then the whole point of existence is to raise that bar higher and higher and higher. That's kind of like the purpose, the existential purpose behind life, is to expand your capacity to love. Until you reach infinity, and then you can reach God. And then you can come back down and start the whole thing all over again. But you see, the nightmares are the true tests of your love. Because you have to be extremely conscious to be able to love a nightmare. And so life is just about things constantly rubbing you the wrong way. And as they rub you the wrong way, they cause suffering and pain. And then eventually you get sick and tired of the suffering and the pain and the resistance, and you start to surrender yourself to this thing, to that thing. And as you do that, that expands your psyche. Part of your ego dies, that expands your psyche, and then this makes you more godlike, more admirable as a conscious entity. It makes you more conscious, it makes you more loving, it makes you more selfless. And so things rub you, keep rubbing you, keep rubbing you, keep rubbing you the wrong way. And if you're growing and living life properly, then less stuff should rub you the wrong way in life. But see, a lot of people, they fall into the trap of actually erecting barriers to sort of create a walled garden that they live inside of where nothing rubs them the wrong way, not because they're able to surrender to it and accept it and let it go of the resistance, but because simply they prevent that stuff from entering into their conscious at all. So it's a very sneaky egoic tactic. And this is what wealthy people do. This is a lot of what people's fantasies, and even poor people have these fantasies about wealth. They think that they can use wealth to create a walled garden. And in practice, a lot of wealthy people do this. They live in a gated community with security guards where they never have to experience theft, rape, murder. They live in parts of the world which are isolated, entire neighborhoods, not just a gated community, but that gated community is inside of like the best neighborhood in the country where there's no homeless people. Again, there's no theft, there's no murder, or it's very low. There's no dilapidated buildings, there's no slums, there's no ghettos. There's no bad roads, they're all nicely paved. There's no bad schools, they're all private elite schools. They send their kids to elite universities, which have billions of dollars of, endowments and donations and the best buildings and the best teachers and the best food and the best this. They go to the best supermarkets. So they completely isolate themselves on yachts and in their luxury cars and even the social circles they hang out with. They don't hang out with ordinary people. They hang out with other elite people who are just like them. They create this bubble from which they're isolated from pain, suffering. And they think that by doing this, they're growing themselves and they're self-actualizing. Actually, they're not. They're fooling themselves. Because this person is very actually easy to penetrate their bubble. Very easy. Their world is a house of cards and it can collapse very quickly. And then their whole life becomes about maintaining that house of cards. See, every day they're working 60 hours a week just to maintain all their yachts and their golf courses and their luxury cars. They're spending more time maintaining that shit than they did acquiring it. And their life is unsatisfying. There's no satisfaction in that kind of life. Why is that? There's actually a very deep metaphysical reason for why. Because the only thing that will satisfy the soul or spirit or the God within you that you are, the only thing that's going to truly satisfy you is to actually make yourself more godlike, which means to expand your capacity to love truly, not to cherry pick stuff. The more you start to cherry pick life because of the wealth and power you have and the fame you have, fame, power, and wealth allows you to cherry pick everything. You can cherry pick your sexual partners. You can cherry pick even your children. You can go to Africa and adopt the perfect child that you want if you have enough wealth. You can buy them a visa and a green card and a citizenship. It allows you to cherry pick your employees. It allows you to cherry pick your friends, the cars you drive, the food you eat, the air you breathe, the places you take vacations at, where you live. You cherry pick absolutely everything about your life, and then you're still miserable. Why is that? Because this little, very narrow version of perfection that you imagined is so fucking narrow compared to infinite consciousness that the spirit within you, which is intuiting the possibility of infinite consciousness, it can't tolerate that. It's too narrow. It's too small. You're thinking too small. When you're chasing billions of dollars and when you're buying a $100 million mega yacht, what I'm telling you is you're thinking too small. But not in the way you think. You see, it's not too small at the level of dollar signs. Dollar signs are not the measure of the bigness of your thinking. And when I'm telling you that you're having sex too small, for example, I'm not saying that having sex with 100 people isn't enough. You need to have sex with 200 people. No, that's never going to solve it. You can have sex with 1,000 people. It's not going to, you're still thinking too small when you're having sex with 1,000 people. That's the fundamental problem in your life, is that everything you're doing is coming from a place of thinking too small. You've mistaken human notions of value with true scale of consciousness. The true measure is your degree of consciousness. That's the true measure, not dollar signs, not how many people you have sex with, not how many houses you have, not how many cars you drive, not how many trophies you've won, not how big your business is. These are all false metrics. The only thing that will make you happy is becoming more godlike. And the reason that is because you're God. You're God, and deep down you know you're God. And you won't settle for anything less. Nothing less will make you happy. And only when you finally realize that you're God, only then will you understand why you weren't happy with anything else. The cars, the money, the food, the travel, the vacations, the houses, the women, the children. How could any of it have made you happy? You will realize how fucking stupid you were for thinking those things would make you happy. How could they? How could anything finite make you happy? So, one practical way for you to become more godlike is to practice forgiveness. Because if you can't forgive the ignorance and unconsciousness of others, and also of your own self, you're not very godlike. And if you want a guided way of doing that, I have an episode called How to Forgive Anyone Who's Ever Hurt You. It's a guided exercise, a visualization exercise, and I explain some theory there as well about forgiveness, which helps you to do that. It's very powerful. Forgiveness is very, very powerful. And then, of course, the greater the evil you can forgive, the more godlike you are. So let me ask you this. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, godlike, how strong is your capacity for forgiveness? Be honest. So 10 would be you completely forgive everyone for everything, and you completely understand the ignorance and unconscious of others. That means if somebody kills your child, you will completely understand. And you will not hold any grudges or resentments. That would be a 10. So by practicing that forgiveness exercise in that other video that I talked about, you can raise that score. And then through other spiritual work, you can also raise that score. Don't think that it's easy to raise this score. This score can be raised at a sort of psychological level, which is nice. But ultimately, to bring that score to a 10, you can't get to a 10 on that score, on that scale, rather, through psychological trickery alone. That would require actually changing your state of consciousness. You need to actually access God consciousness. to do that. And you would need to maintain that consciousness in order to really maintain that 10. Be careful here. I'm not trying to put unrealistic expectations on you. See, part of what it means to have compassion and forgiveness for others is realizing their limitations. So I know you're a finite human. I'm a finite human too, in a certain sense. And so because of that, you don't want to now guilt yourself over not being a 10 on this scale. This is going to be counterproductive. You don't got to be perfect. And in fact, it's actually literally impossible for you to be at a 10 as long as you're a human. But what you can do is you can begin the process of increasing your capacity for forgiveness. Like if you're at a 2 right now, you could certainly move up to a 3, to a 4, just by doing the exercises in that video I talked about. How to forgive anyone who's ever hurt you. That's the title. Search for it. And that would significantly increase the quality of your life. That is what's actually going to make you happier, not the chasing of the money and the sex and the houses and stuff. This is the real work towards becoming more happy. And then if you continue doing other practices, yoga, meditation, self-inquiry, contemplation, visualizations, psychedelics, and many other techniques that I've talked about many times in the past throughout all my videos, that will slowly increase your capacity for forgiveness and for love. Really, forgiveness is nothing other than love. And it's nothing other than just understanding ignorance and understanding unconsciousness and just surrendering to it and accepting it. And really, it's nothing other than understanding and accepting yourself. All these things are ultimately synonymous. So I hope that this helps you connect some dots in your mind. I hope this explains some of the logic behind how God works. So that's that, but I need to issue an important disclaimer here. Everything I talked about in this episode came from my own personal experiences and direct consciousness. It's not something I sat down and made up one day. It's not something I read in the Bible or from any spiritual school or book. It's not something I've heard other humans tell me and I have adopted as a belief. The things I'm saying are too radical to believe. They're literally unbelievable. They're incredible. It's taken me some years just to integrate these experiences. The reason I'm talking about them is not so that you adopt this as a dogma and you walk around telling people that God will forgive all your sins. This helps nobody. This doesn't help other people, and it certainly won't help to increase the quality of your life to adopt this as a belief. The reason I'm sharing this is because I feel like I'm an explorer who went into the Amazon jungle, hacked through it with a machete, and as I was doing that, I discovered some amazing things. I discovered amazing rare birds and insects and monkeys and cool creatures and cool plant life and even, remote villagers that I've never even contacted humans. I've experienced all this amazing rare stuff that few have experienced. And then I come back from the jungle and I tell you some stories about it. The purpose of me telling you the stories is not for you to then get lost in the stories and then to tell your friends about my stories. The purpose is simply to present you with new possibilities and opportunities for what you can also do in your life. That's the purpose of everything I talk about. I'm painfully aware of the limited nature of language and sharing stories, and especially sharing mystical experiences and infinite states of consciousness. These things literally cannot be shared. They're ineffable. They're incommunicable. So then why do I spend thousands of hours talking about it? simply because very few in our culture talk about it. They don't talk about these possibilities in school. They don't talk about these possibilities at the workplace that you work. They don't talk about it on TV. They don't talk about it on Facebook. They don't talk about it on YouTube ads. They don't talk about it in most of the YouTube videos you watch. They don't talk about it in most of the books you read, or the magazines, or at the movies. Your friends don't know about it. Your parents don't know about it. Even your therapist and your preacher doesn't know about it. So my function is simply to present these possibilities to you. You can go to the Amazon, you can hack through that jungle, and you can see some amazing stuff, and it'll change who you are. But it'll only change who you are if you go and do it. It won't change who you are if you just listen to my stories and you believe them. And it won't change who you are just by reading a book about it. I could write a book about all my crazy experiences, and it would change nothing for you, other than maybe inspiring you to do it yourself. And that's really the goal here. The goal is twofold. First of all, it's to just open your mind to these possibilities. These are very radical possibilities, and if they're not properly explained, what happens is your mind doesn't even recognize that it's a possibility. Like, you could go to a Catholic church, and they will preach to you about God and about heaven and all sorts of angels and beautiful things. And they'll talk about mystical experiences they've had, but your mind won't register this as a real possibility. The communication has to meet you where you're at, such that your mind registers like, oh, maybe I could do this for myself. So that's the first function of these talks. The second function of these talks is to inspire you to do it with some charisma and charm. You know, I'm sexing this stuff up. Some of this stuff I'm exaggerating, or I'm playing it up, I'm kind of dramatizing it for the benefit of you getting inspired. Now, actually, there's sort of there's a trick here. I say I'm exaggerating and dramatizing some of this stuff. I am, but actually what I'm doing is I'm underselling it. It might seem like I'm overselling it. And I just said that I'm dramatizing and exaggerating some of this, but truly I'm underselling how amazing this is. No amount of words can overstate how amazing infinite consciousness is, or infinite love, or the realization that you are God, or infinite forgiveness. So the reason I sometimes exaggerate and dramatize stuff is because part of my job is not just to tell you the truth, it's to market the truth to you. It's to get you to realize, like, holy shit, this is important. It's to interrupt the petty, small thinking that the majority of your life is. Somehow I have to cut through that shit. Through all of the programming of culture, society, of your friends, of your family, and of your own ego mind, all of this nonsense, we have to somehow cut through that. So because of that, I feel entitled sometimes to exaggerate or to dramatize stuff, because I know that if you actually realize some of these experiences that I've had and have them for yourself, you will be so blown away by it, but that you will realize, like, that I undersold it. It's impossible to oversell infinity. So that's kind of, just understand, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And so anyways, the point here being that it's to show you the possibilities, to inspire you to actually do it, and then maybe there's a third function here, which is to actually give you some techniques. If you're a consistent viewer and follower of my content, you know I've shared a lot of techniques with you. I've given you a lot of theory, but I've also laid out all the techniques. The problem is you don't want to use them. The problem is you're still thinking that you can just kind of skate by without the techniques. You still hope that if you just watch enough of my videos that that'll be good enough. Well, it won't. Just because you know of the possibility of going to the Amazon, just because you're inspired to go to the Amazon for yourself, and just because you have the boat and the airplane and the machete and the food supplies and the tent and the sleeping bag and you bought all that equipment, just because you've done all those things does not mean you're actually going to go to the Amazon and do it. That is the thing that really matters, is you doing it. And there's nothing I can say that will get you to do it, as long as all these other things have already been said. That's on you. It's on you. How much do you want out of life? Like I've said before, life works in a beautiful way where you will get what you put into it. If you're not actually willing to go to the Amazon, you're going to miss out on like 95% of what there is to know about the Amazon. So what that tells me is that you're not really a serious explorer. Likewise, if you're not actually willing to do the practices, if you're not willing to do some yoga, some self-inquiry, some meditation retreats, some solo retreats, some, psychedelics, some other kind of practices I've talked about, some shamanic breathing, for example. If you're not willing to do these practices and you're not willing to do them seriously, then you're not a serious explorer of consciousness, and you're really not serious about life. You're not serious about being human. You're not serious about getting the most out of existence. And so my biggest function here is really just to hammer you. In every episode, I got to just hammer you and hammer you and hammer you over the head of how much you are not, well, let's put it this way, how much you're leaving on the cutting room floor with the way that you're living your life. There's so much amazing stuff that you're missing. But you can't get it in an easy way. There's a trade-off. The more amazing a thing is that you're missing, the more work, emotional labor you're going to have to expend to actualize that thing. That's when your life really starts to go downhill, is when you stop taking it seriously, when you get complacent and lazy, and you just want to coast through life. And you stop wanting to expand your consciousness. That's the biggest danger these days, because people get so easily complacent. We have so much amazing media entertainment. I mean, you could spend the rest of your life on YouTube watching funny videos or comedy specials or movies or Netflix or porn or music or sitcoms, TV shows, playing video games. You could spend the rest of your life doing this. This is the greatest danger, is 10 years go by and you've wasted all of it just doing those things. Then 20 years go by, 30 years go by, then by that point, it's too painful for you to turn around and to get serious about life, because you've already wasted so much of it for you now to get serious, you have to admit to yourself how much you've wasted. That's going to be very, very difficult. The longer you wait, the more difficult it's going to be. Life is meant to be lived on the edge, where you are challenging yourself. You don't allow yourself to get complacent or too lazy or too comfortable. Pushing yourself, expanding yourself in the right ways. Not falling into that trap of chasing wealth and luxury. But there's only so much I can say. The rest really is up to you. The question is, are you going to do it? And it's going to be difficult to do. And the reason I got to oversell this journey is because if you don't have a very compelling vision of why you're doing it, you're never going to persevere past all of the grind and challenge and obstacles and the mundaneness of just sitting down and meditating or doing yoga for an hour every day for years and years and years. You know, that's tedious stuff. You're not going to go through the tedium of it, especially because all of your friends aren't doing it. All of your family members are going to drag you down, tell you to stop doing it. Your culture and society will lure you away with promises of easy pleasure and wealth and luxury and get-rich-quick schemes, you see. And so it's just so easy to lure you away, to seduce you from truly living a self-actualizing life. And so part of my job here is to keep you on track with that, to keep reminding you of what life is really about and pointing out the traps and the distractions. That's another, maybe fourth function of what I do here. See, I present you with possibilities. I inspire you to do it for yourself. I share techniques with you for how to do it. And then lastly, I share all of the traps and dangers and ways you can fuck it up. And there's hundreds of ways that you can fuck it up. And by becoming aware of all the ways you can fuck it up, that helps you to avoid all the landmines as you're walking down the minefield. Mind field. Not minefield, mind field. You are in a mind field, and this mind field is filled with mind traps, which is why we talk about epistemology so much. We talk about self-deception. We talk about self-bias and all the other ways that your mind fools you. All right, that's it. I'm done here. Please click that like button for me and come check out Actualized.org. That's my website. On there, you will find some free and some paid resources that can help you along on this journey. You can find my book list, which presents you with the most important pieces of theory that you will need to guide you in your practices. Also shares a lot of techniques and methods and practices in those books. You will find my life purpose course, which will help you to align your life with your top values and get you a sense of purpose and direction, which is actually crucial for having motivation. The life purpose course, really, I could have called it the how to get yourself motivated for a lifetime course. It gives you the foundation for a lifetime of motivation, intrinsic motivation. And without motivation, you're never going to be successful in anything that you do. Motivation is crucial. Inspiration is crucial. Inspiration is literally inspirited, to be inspired, to be filled with spirit, which is what the source of this whole episode was. Remember, I started off telling you that I was inspired. Literally, I was filled with spirit. And then that manifested itself as this conversation here today. This is not Leo coming up with this shit. This is the universe speaking through some sort of meat vehicle. This is spirit speaking to spirit. You'll also find my blog with exclusive content that I share, lots of free, juicy stuff on my blog. Check it out. I share a lot of documentaries, interesting stuff that I find on YouTube and elsewhere on the internet, sort of higher consciousness, healthy type of stuff that expands your perspective. If you'd like, you can support me at patreon.com/actualized with some donations. You can check out my second channel called Actualized Clips, which features short little segments of my main videos in case you don't have the patience to sit through a 2-hour, 3-hour talk. And that is that. I want to end with some final point. Your life will change the moment that you have some direct consciousness and experiences of these advanced things that I'm talking about. It's crucial that you understand that what I'm talking about is not just some armchair philosophy that I came up with as I was sitting around smoking some weed. This is stuff you can experience for yourself. Not only can you, but you must, if you're going to follow along with me. If you only keep what I talk about at an intellectual level and you never validate it through direct mystical experience of your own, these teachings can become very counterproductive. They can make you feel miserable and depressed. They can ultimately even make you suicidal, because what's going to happen is that you're going to have so many advanced and amazing ideas in your mind, but then in your normal life, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to wake up and it's going to be like, well, this is just my boring, shitty life. And there's going to be a huge disconnect between the theory you learned from me about how beautiful and loving life is, and then your shitty life. You got to bridge this gap somehow. Now, it's okay if you're just beginning with my content. You can spend 6, 12 months just learning theory. It's important just to learn theory. 12 months of learning theory is not bad. You spent 12 years in school just learning theory, right? 12 months of theory is nothing. All good and fine. But then after 1 or 2 years, at some point you got to say, okay, enough of the theory. I got to somehow bridge the gap between the theory and my life. What do I got to do to actually start to experience some of these things happening in my life? And if you don't do that, I'm telling you, it's not going to be healthy. It's going to become dysfunctional. That's one of the traps. I've warned you about this trap in the past. Many times I've warned you about this trap. But I got to keep warning you about this trap. And I think a lot of people don't realize how serious this trap can get. I myself have suffered from this. One of the reasons I suffer from it is because, look, one of the biggest traps for me is that I do this professionally. I get paid for this. This is sort of my career and my life purpose. But that's still not enough for me to be happy. And that's still not enough for me to actualize the things I talk about. It's a lot easier to talk about the things I talk about than to actually do them. I hope you understand this. I hope you understand that I talk about a lot of stuff. That doesn't mean I've actualized all of it. You might then wonder, well, Leo, then you're a hypocrite, and why are you talking about stuff you haven't actualized? Well, because if I only limited my talks to the things that I fully actualized myself and mastered, this would actually be imposing a limit upon you. I don't want to impose my personal limits upon you. I want to show you the full range of what's possible with a human life. you're going to only actualize maybe 10% of what I say. And that itself will be life transforming for you. Right? I'm not expecting you to actualize 100% of it. I'm not expecting myself to actualize 100% of it. But I'm not going to limit myself to that, because there would be such huge gaps in your understanding of reality if you only limited the things you could think and talk about to the things that you've fully mastered. There has to be a sort of a bootstrapping process where you're thinking about this stuff, you're contemplating it, you're making mistakes, you're misunderstanding some stuff, you're getting trapped in some epistemic, problems, but then you correct as you keep going. This is a sort of it is a bit of a fake it till you make it process. You learn the theory, you get excited by the theory, it motivates you. Have you actualized it yet? No, you're inspired by it. You're working towards it. It might take you 10 years to actualize some of it. And that's fine. How else could it be? You can't begin this journey and not make any mistakes. You can't begin this journey and be all perfect. You can't begin this journey and already be done. If you were already done, we wouldn't need to be talking about it. If I was done with my work, I wouldn't need to be talking about it with you, because I would even transcend the need to talk about it with you. Talking about it with you is also part of my process. It's got pros and cons. Some of the pros are that I get to talk this stuff out. I get to understand it very deeply. The more you teach something and the deeper you teach it, the deeper you start to understand it yourself. That's the pros of it. The cons of it is that I actually do suffer a lot from getting trapped in the conceptualization of these things. In a certain sense, I would be able to grow faster if I didn't have to teach this stuff, because I could just focus on doing my spiritual practices and other development work, not talk about it with anybody. In a certain sense, that's powerful. That's powerful. I do have to overthink these things so that I could teach it. And the teaching of it is not the same thing as actually embodying it. These are two different things. There can be people in the world who are amazing at embodying something, just amazing, but they're not good at teaching it. And moreover, they're not good at marketing it. They're even worse at marketing it. And they're even worse at inspiring and motivating you to do it. These are all different skill sets. So be very clear that my embodiment is very weak compared to my abilities to communicate these ideas. I have a special gift and talent for communicating these ideas. Somehow my brain, my mind is wired for it. It comes to me naturally, spontaneously, intuitively. I get inspired to do this, to communicate these things. I'm inspired just by the act of communicating these ideas. But understand that that's different from embodying them. And so for me, one of the greatest struggles is that my ability to inspire you and to communicate to you about these ideas, and even to communicate them to myself, for me, that's much easier. I have a much higher talent for that than for actually embodying these ideas. Now, of course, that doesn't mean I don't work at it. And in fact, lately I've been doubling my efforts at embodying these ideas, because sometimes I get to a point where it's like, I've talked so much about this shit, and now I realize just the gap between what I've talked about and what I'm actually actualizing is getting too wide. I have to work more on actualizing it. And so that is definitely something I struggle with, and I know you guys yourself struggle with it too. And that's just part of this work. It's just part of this work. This work is going to be very messy and dirty in practice. It's not going to be this simple, clear-cut, linear path like, oh, today I learned about enlightenment, tomorrow I go to a meditation retreat, I meditate a few times, then I become enlightened, and then it's all done, it's all over. It's going to be way more dirty and hairy than that. You're going to have backsliding and ego backlashes and confusions. You're going to jump between different spiritual schools and different techniques and different paths. And you're going to listen to this teacher, then that teacher. Then you're going to quit spirituality for a year. Then you're going to come back to it and do it hardcore for a year. Then you're going to quit it again. Then you're going to come back and do some other thing. And it's going to be all over the place. You're going to be doing your business or your life purpose and then spirituality on the side. Then you're going to flip that around and do it the other way. And you're going to have relationship things, and then you're going to have money problems. And that's the thing here, is that it's so messy. And it's going to be uniquely messy for you. Your mess is going to be uniquely yours. My mess is uniquely mine. You're going to have health problems arise. You're going to have money problems arise. You're going to have relationship problems arise. You're going to have spiritual crises arise. You're going to have moments where you're depressed and miserable and you're doubtful that any of this stuff is even possible, or that it's real, or that it works, or that it's going to work for you. And you got to keep going. You got to keep going, going, and going. Persevering past all these obstacles. So the obstacles are all guaranteed. The mistakes are all guaranteed. You're going to be making them. It's just a question of the quantity and severity of them and whether you learn your lessons from these mistakes. So making mistakes is not the problem. The problem is when your mistakes are either catastrophic or they cripple your motivation. They get you to quit. That's the real problem. Or when you keep making the same mistake over and over and over again for decades. That's also a problem because your time is finite, it's short. You got to use your time effectively here. You only have so many decades, and the decades, as you get older, they pass faster. Keep that in mind. All right, so that's enough. I've given you plenty of warnings and disclaimers here. So now you sort of understand the realities of this work. And of course, stay tuned for more.